So yesterday we talked about the first six melachot of Shabbat, and we concluded that there are very few differences between Shabbat and Yom Tov with regards to these melachot. When we come to the seventh melacha of Borer, there is a major difference. On Shabbat, it's forbidden to select. This applies both to food items and, according to the halakha, also non-food items as well. And that means one cannot take out something which, if there is a mixture, one cannot take out what's not wanted on Shabbat. And there are three conditions in order to select from a mixture on Shabbat. It has to be the ochel from the pesolet, i.e. the what's wanted from the non-wanted. One has to select the wanted from the non-wanted for immediate use, which means about in the next half an hour or so. And thirdly, it needs to be done with one's hand or with regular cutlery and not specific and advanced utensils to be able to separate. On Yom Tov, however, basically speaking, the first two conditions do not apply. The third does, but the first two doesn't. But there's a few important points here. Firstly, is that this only applies to borer in a house setting. Of course, there is a borer in the Mishkan, for example, after they would thresh the pods. There was a mixture of the seeds together with other things, with rocks, stones, and pebbles, and so they would select something like that, which is done in the field or in the factory or on an industrial scale, is clearly forbidden on Yom Tov to do. This whole discussion we're having about selecting Yom Tov is talking about what most people would be thinking about and what's going to be most necessary on Yom Tov in the house. So to give some examples for this, let's say you have a mixture of nuts in a bowl. You have pistachios and you have almonds, and there are more pistachios than almonds, and you only want the pistachios, you don't want the almonds. So on Shabbat, to take out the almonds and just eat the pistachios would be forbidden, because one is selecting what's not wanted from the wanted, and that is prohibited on Shabbat. On Yom Tov, however, if it's easier, rather than taking out the majority of the pistachios, which is wanted, which would be permissible to do on Shabbat, but it's going to be longer to do so, one is allowed to directly take out the almonds, what's the non-wanted. So even though one is taking out the non-wanted from the wanted, on Yom Tov this is permissible. If one has a salad, and in the salad there are lemon pips, so on Shabbat, because the lemon pips are mixed into the salad, one cannot just take out the lemon pip by itself. One need to do it in certain conditions, together with other fruit and so on, whatever, without going into the details. On Yom Tov, one can take one's hand and pick it out directly without anything else, because it's easier to do that rather than to do other things. And selecting what's not wanted from the wanted on Yom Tov is permissible, definitely for Sfaradim. Even for Ashkenazim, the Rama brings those who are strict, but that's specifically talking about with flour. But all other kinds of things in the kitchen, generally speaking, are permissible for Ashkenazim like Sfaradim, and therefore one can select the non-wanted from the wanted. Same with cutlery. You have a mixture of cutlery, and you just want the fork, you've got a couple of knives mixed in there, and the majority are the forks. Normally on Shabbat, you wouldn't be able to take out the knives and just leave yourself with the forks. On Yom Tov, you can do so. Fish with bones, we should know that even for Sfarad, according to some of the poskim, it is permissible even on Shabbat to take out the bones. I'm not going to go into the reason for it now, but that's a discussion with regards to Shabbat. With Yom Tov, however, certainly it would be permissible to take out the bones from the fish, to take out the bones of the chicken, and so on, because on Yom Tov one is allowed to take what's not wanted from the wanted. So that's point number one. Point number two is one can even select the non-wanted or the wanted, even if it's for later on in the day. Generally speaking, on Shabbat has to be for immediate consumption. On Yom Tov, however, this condition doesn't apply, and one can already select and prepare things, of course, for Yom Tov itself, but for any time on Yom Tov, it is permissible to do so. However, what still remains prohibited on Yom Tov is to use a specified instrument, to use something like something which is more developed more than just one's hand or one's simple cutlery. So one can, of course, peel oranges on Shabbat with a knife, but to use other things like a strainer or so on, or these kinds of things, a sieve, these are all prohibited on Yom Tov. And the reason is Chachamim didn't want it to look, if you're using these utensils, then it already looks like it's more of an industrial thing, and therefore they prohibited that. So in conclusion, on Yom Tov, a person is allowed to select to do borer, to take the non-wanted from the wanted, even though on Shabbat it's not allowed. One can even do so for later on in the day, but one cannot use a designated instrument to separate on Yom Tov. One needs to use one's hands or regular cutlery, but not beyond that.